Welcome to Legal Lines. My name is Tom O'Shea, the host of this program that is brought to you by the York County Bar Foundation. I have a special guest today, David Sunday, the recently elected district attorney for York County. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Tom. It's
And
a pleasure to be here.
congratulations on your recent election. And
Thank you very much.
You're right as we're taping this show. You've been in office how long?
I've been in office 3 weeks.
3 weeks. So
Yep.
You got a lot ahead of you.
Absolutely.
All
Yep.
right. But the topic of today's program is very serious. It's the opioid crisis in York County. I'm sorry, I'm a little tongue-tied. The opioid crisis in York County, a very serious topic. And Dave, even prior to being elected DA, has been very, very active in the programs to try to stop this crisis locally. But before we talk about that, let's talk a little bit about the seriousness of the problem. I know you recently gave me some numbers, so instead of asking you to memorize them, I'll go over them. But you told me that there were 128 opioid overdose deaths in York County in 2017.
That's correct.
And there were 76 in 2016.
That's
so
right.
The problem has been getting worse.
Mm-hmm.
You also told me another interesting fact, and that is that in 2017 there were 284 naloxone reversals. Now,
Right.
Explain to the audience what that means.
Sure, Tom. Well, a few points first before I get to the naloxone reversals. Those numbers are important because they give you a snapshot of deaths. And that is obviously extremely important to this issue. It's important to understand that that's the end result for people that decide to use heroin. The issue, however, with those specific numbers are they don't tell the whole story. The whole story involves many, many different other issues that come along with this, what I call this public health crisis. A lot of people call it an epidemic. And along with that comes the utilization of resources across the board through our federal government, state government, local government, and the amount of resources that's being poured into this is overwhelming, which pulls us back to those naloxone reversals. What a lot of people also don't understand is when they think of the job or the duties of a police officer, they think of someone that, investigates crimes, charges people with crimes, or maybe writes speeding tickets for a lot of people, I'm sure not you included. However, a police officer in today's world has many, many different additional duties. One of them is basically every police officer on the street is more or less a drug and alcohol counselor now. And that's important to understand because through the course of their duties, one of the things that they do, and York County was the second county in the state where this occurred, was these officers carry what's called the life-saving reversal drug naloxone. And this is something that started a few years ago. And so they carry this naloxone, and when they are the first on the scene for a suspected drug overdose and someone is overdosing, they utilize this naloxone, and it's called a reversal. And through that reversal, what they do is they save their life. And based on what's happening now in the environment around us, the potency and the toxicity of the heroin itself is so powerful that oftentimes it might take 7, 8, 9 hits of this medication to bring someone back. And that's only the beginning. Once they come back, then they're taken obviously to the hospital where they begin hopefully a journey to sobriety and hopefully to things like family unification. But too often than not, that's not the case.
So naloxone is basically a drug that reverses the heroin in the system?
What it does is, and I'm not an expert on the physiological nuances of how it works. However, what it does, I know, is it blocks the receptor cells that allow people to become high from the opioids. And so what happens is it's only temporary. And oftentimes someone may be overdosing, the naloxone is used, because when someone overdoses, one of the first signs that something very, very bad is happening is someone may fall asleep, and a lot of people refer to this loud snoring that occurs. And so someone may have this loud snoring and you can't bring them back, and they won't wake up, and they're starting to turn blue, and their respiratory system starting to shut down. And so this naloxone stops the effect of the opioid temporarily, which is why that individual must be rushed to the hospital quickly, because what happens is when the naloxone wears off after 5 or 10 minutes, then that person will begin overdosing again. And so that's why it's vital that not only naloxone is administered quickly, but that person also is taken to the hospital.
And as I said with the statistic that you gave me before the program began, 284 times just
Right.
in 2017,
Right.
police officers administered this to save somebody who might well have added to the statistic of the deaths.
That's right, Tom, and that's in York County alone. And so the police officers in York County over 284 times last year saved someone's life that otherwise most likely would have died.
Okay, and just with the scope of the problem, this isn't just young people or people who are unemployed or I mean, it's no specific segment of the population.
No, Tom, there is no demographic that is immune to this public health crisis, this epidemic. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It doesn't matter where you come from, where you live. This is everywhere, everywhere.
And I think you gave me another statistic that probably 70% of the people who are addicted to heroin started on some other type of prescription painkiller.
One of the, when I would say about 3.5 years ago, heroin overdose deaths in York County almost tripled. And that's when sort of the red flag was thrown. That's when that's when all the alarms went off in the coroner's office, in the district attorney's office, that we have a major problem. And unfortunately, what happens, well, too often than not, problems like this aren't discovered until it gets to a point where, unfortunately, it's identified in the district attorney's office and the coroner's office. If we were viewing this sort of in a financial sense, I call those lagging indicators. And so by the time it hits us, so many other things must have occurred to get us to that point. Okay. And so taking a step back, 3.5 years ago when we started the Heroin Task Force, which is now the York Opioid Collaborative, one of the very first things we did was we spent a lot of time working with our partners in the medical community to figure out why exactly is this occurring, what happened, why are we here? And as time went on, it became, I will say, generally universally accepted that close to 60-70% of all heroin addicts at some point started out using, I'll say, misusing prescription pain pills in a way that wasn't in accordance with their prescription. And so, unfortunately, we're in a position where that happened very quietly. It happened under the radar. It happened in a slow manner. It was a slow build. And it ultimately got to a point where, and I may have this number slightly wrong, Tom, but it's going to be close. Over the last, if you go back in time to when this all started, meaning we'll go back to that 3.5-year mark, at that point, approximately 90%, think of this, 90% of all the opioid painkillers that are manufactured in the planet were being prescribed in the United States. And so we had a tremendous amount of prescriptions that were occurring. And I don't want in any way to malign the fine work of all of our doctors and physicians in the community. And I say that very sincerely because since day one, they have been unwavering partners in our mission to reverse this epidemic. And so, a lot of them have told me that, over the years, they really didn't receive too much training with regard to pain management. And a lot of this was pushed by the pharmaceutical companies. And so that kind of brought us to where we're at. We clamped down. When I say we, I'll say the collective we in law enforcement. The federal government clamped down on the amount of prescriptions. On different tools became available that doctors didn't have previously, such as the prescription pill monitoring database that now exists in Pennsylvania that was up and running, I believe, over the last year to year and a half. So prior to that, if you were a physician, Tom, and I came to you, you wouldn't know if I was going to multiple doctors. But now you could enter my name into a database and you could say, well, Dave, I see that an hour ago you were at this dentist or wherever it may have been. getting another prescription. And so as a result of that, we've really hammered down on the amount of drugs that are being misused. So what happened was we had this whole community full of people who were in the throes of opioid addiction. They can't get their pills. Just like any other economy, the supply went down, the price went up for those pills, and as a result of that, a lot of people turned to heroin. And that basically is a very short Cliff Notes version as to, I'll say, the terrible scenario that brought us to where we're at right now.
It's one of those reasons that heroin is less expensive than some of these other painkillers.
Heroin is extremely cheap compared to someone who's buying prescription pain pills from, say, a dealer or someone who is illegally distributing them. It is unbelievably less expensive. It's
Okay.
not even in the ballpark.
And one of the things that you told me preparing for this show is that the type of heroin that is being used now is different than it was a few years ago.
Sure.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, absolutely. So as this battle has progressed, there's been many different challenges that have come up. So, you solve a problem, a new problem pops up. Well, one of the things that has occurred over the last, and when we go back to the numbers that you provided in the beginning of the show, the number of overdose deaths in York County has almost doubled from last year, from 2016 to 2017. Well, one of the important, I'll say critical facts that must be understood in looking at those numbers is the following. In 2014, 2015, when you look at the toxicology report on someone who died, the majority of the drugs that were found in their system was heroin. What we've seen over the last year to 2 years is the number of people that die solely from heroin is actually very low. The majority of the overdose deaths include a drug called fentanyl. And that drug fentanyl is now appearing in the majority of people's systems who die of an opioid overdose. And so what that tells us in law enforcement, what that tells the medical profession is that the heroin that's being sold, let me rephrase that, the heroin that's killing people is vastly, vastly more potent and exponentially more dangerous than the heroin even that we've seen even 2 or 3 years ago.
Okay, and what is the fentanyl? What is that?
So fentanyl, and again, I'm not a medical expert, so take this. The fentanyl is an opioid. It's a painkiller. It is, what I've been told, up to, if not more than 100 times more powerful than and I hesitate to say typical heroin because all heroin's bad, but it's about 100 times more potent than the heroin that is on the market. Fentanyl, again, from what I've been told, is one of the most powerful painkillers that exist on the market. I know that it's utilized for some people with end-stage cancer and things of that nature. And so it's an extremely powerful painkiller.
So it's also a drug that could have a good purpose.
Absolutely, 1,000%.
But
Yep.
dealers or suppliers of illegal heroin are basically spiking it with fentanyl, is that?
Absolutely, and in some cases we've had people die where it was 100% fentanyl.
Okay. All right, well, we're almost out of time in the first half of this program,
Okay.
Dave, but in the second half we're going to be talking about the York Opioid Collaborative and your involvement with that. And I know that this is a very serious problem, that we're talking about York County, but it's also a very serious problem throughout the nation, which is talking about what we're doing here.
Very much so.
Okay, and we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to Legal Lines. My guest today is York County's District Attorney, David Sunday. Welcome back.
Thank you, Tom.
And we're talking about the very serious topic, the opioid, I keep tripping on this, opioid crisis in York County. A very serious topic, and Dave has been involved with efforts to try to eliminate this problem for several years. And one of the projects that exists in York County is the York Opioid Collaborative. And Dave, I'd like you to talk about that.
Sure, Tom. One of the issues was when we started fighting, and I use the term fighting because it truly is a fight. When we started fighting this epidemic about 3.5 years ago, we didn't really know where to start. And we didn't know where to start because there were no cliff notes. There wasn't a guide. You couldn't Google, what to do because it hadn't been done. And so we sort of learned through trial and error. But one of the things that when I say the collective we of all the stakeholders in the community discovered very simply was the only way that we will ever get ahead of this is that if we use a multi-pronged approach. And that multi-pronged approach can't be one that's just led by law enforcement or the medical community. It's got to be one that involves a concerted effort with concerned citizens and other people as well, because it's going to take a community to solve this. More often than not, you'll hear a prosecutor, you'll hear maybe a police chief or police officer say that we're not going to be able to arrest our way out of this. And that, although has become cliche, it's vital because it's true. And we in law enforcement, although we are a critical component to the end result, we're only one of many, many, many that are involved in this battle. So going back to the York Opioid Collaborative, we originally started with the Heroin Task Force. And the task force was something that was put together very quickly. It was something that was put together with our desire to have a rapid response to stem off the overdose deaths. And as the Heroin Task Force progressed and we all became more educated about the causes, the effects, what the issues were, we realized very quickly that it wasn't going to take, this wasn't a part-time effort. This wasn't the DA's office will work one day, the coroner's office will work another day, and we needed someone full-time coordinating these efforts. And so what we did was we created the York Opioid Collaborative. And in doing so, we hired an executive director. We were able to hire that executive director through grant funding from sources such as the Barr Foundation and other places very generously. And so we have Dr. Matt Howie. He's a medical doctor. And what he does is he works all day to help coordinate the efforts and also to conduct research. And so on the collaborative itself, we meet monthly. And the purpose of the meetings is to foster something that I believe was woefully lacking, which was meaningful collaborative dialogue. And one of the most amazing things to see is when you get into a room with 50 people who traditionally through the course of their jobs don't really cross paths, but yet are fighting the same things in their own areas.
So
Yep.
I don't mean to interrupt.
No, please,
But
yeah.
as far as the people concerned, 50, that's a large number.
Oh, absolutely.
And I understand that there's law
Yep.
enforcement, district attorney,
Yep.
representative, yourself, the district attorney, other people from the DA's office, police officers, and medical doctors.
Yes.
What other people are on this task force?
Well, you covered a lot of them, Tom, and when you go through the room, and I'm just in my mind visioning it here, you go through the room, we have a lot of people who are treatment providers. And so that's obviously vital because treatment is one of the main
Like mental health
well, we have
professionals?
mental health officials. We have treatment providers for drug and alcohol treatment. So the York and Adams County Drug and Alcohol Commission has a representative who is there, and that person is obviously vital to the end result. We have people there who run different treatment facilities. We have people there who run halfway houses, sober living homes. We have probation and parole. We have a member of the bench who attends the meetings. We have people from clergy. So we now have reached out to the faith-based community because we want to bring everyone into the fold. And so we have, again, members of the faith-based community. We have elected officials because there's obviously a legislative component to this as well. And so what we tried to do was we tried to put in that room everyone that could aid in solving an issue that would come up. And so that's pretty much who all there. Oh, in addition to that, we've partnered with different universities. And so we've partnered with UPMC, and so University of Pittsburgh. And they operate a website that's called Overdose PA. And so they collect data from the Opioid Task Force, and they make that available online. In addition to that, we partner with York College on a few different issues. One of them that was vital to the cause was our executive director partnered with a professor from your college, and what they did was they worked together to try to map out essentially the path that an addict takes from using to death. And the purpose of that is to identify through specific data the areas where people are most likely to unfortunately die. And so through the course of that, we've been able to identify the areas that have the highest statistic probability in someone's life, which in turn allows resources to be funneled to those areas. The prison is involved with the York Opioid Collaborative, people from the reentry program.
I also understand you work very closely with the coroner's office with respect to this
Absolutely.
crisis.
We're very lucky in York County to have a coroner that's as active and as compassionate and caring as the one we have, Pam Gay. And I say that very sincerely because from day one, she has been a true advocate for victims, for the families left behind, and her voice and her initiative has been a driving force in everything that the collaborative has done. And so the coroner's office is vital because the coroner's office collects that final data that's used. And so that's why, in addition to knowing sort of all the players involved here, that's the vital component for the coroner's office. In addition to that, there are not-for-profits out there that are extremely involved in everything that goes on in this battle. And one of them I want to highlight is called Not One More. And so Not One More is a group of parents, essentially, who came together and formed this not-for-profit. And what they do is they provide education, but it's much more than that. They are available. They talk to people. They help other parents get through this. They educate parents. They come to every single meeting that ever exists. They also have raised money to purchase naloxone to provide to families. And so they have been a unbelievably helpful partner in this fight as well.
Okay, so it sounds like you have all the right people on this task force.
Right.
And tell us the work that you do.
So what we do, and this starts sort of going back in time, what the work that we've done over time as a group has been one of identifying, first of all, where did this problem start, where is it going, and how do we stop it? And with that being said, there are two things that we have to discuss to understand, and this is an unbelievably complex issue. The causes are vast. I mean, many people who end up succumbing to addiction are people that have some sort of had a traumatic experience as a child. There are so many different things and factors that come into play. So what we are focusing on is the area where we can get the biggest return for the time and energy that's put in, and one of which is educating the community. Educating the community is so important, Tom, because we are right now working on, when I say we, again, the medical community, the justice system through our treatment courts, doing everything we can to help people that are currently in the throes of addiction. The second part to that is we are doing everything in our power to keep people from getting addicted in the first place. Because as time goes on, the next generation will grow into the adults of tomorrow. And the goal is to do everything in our power to keep them from making the mistakes that others have made previously. And that's really important because, there's only so much we can do to help someone who's currently addicted. The success rate for treatment, and I don't have the specific numbers on me, the success rate is not very high because once someone is in the throes of opioid addiction, it's something that they have to fight for the rest of their lives, forever. And with an eye towards creating a safe and healthy community, we must keep people from using in the first place. And so we go around, we go to schools, we go to churches, we go to town hall meetings.
I'd like to stop you on the
Sure.
town hall meetings because You told me that you've had a number of town hall meetings. I think you said something like over 100 so
Yeah.
far.
Yep.
And two things. Number one, what goes on at the town hall
Sure.
meetings? Number two, how do people find out about the town hall meetings?
Well, the town hall meetings in the beginning were things that were meetings that were primarily created by the task force by reaching out to individuals, but over time, organizations all throughout the community on their own schedule these meetings, and they invite the Opioid Collaborative to come and speak there. The whole purpose of the meetings is to provide the community with answers. And a lot of times those answers, quite frankly, are we don't know. But it gives the people in the community an opportunity to sit with the district attorney, to sit with the coroner, to sit with other elected officials and police officers and police chiefs, and not only ask them questions that are important to them and to their loved ones, but also to give us explanations on things that they're going through, because we learn as much in the town hall meetings as they do. And I just want to say also, Tom, with regard to the town hall meetings provide a forum that is a safe place where a lot of times, people are afraid to come out and they're afraid to ask. And years ago, so many people, due to the stigma, didn't want to let anyone know they had a problem. They didn't want to let anyone know that this was a concern of theirs for fear that in the community they might be labeled whatever. And what we've worked on through these town hall meetings is creating a community where questions, where issues like this are embraced. And that is something that I believe has been a major success of the task force. In addition to that, and I'm not sure how much time we have left, with regard to the district attorney's office and law enforcement, I want to take a moment and I want to talk about their role with regard to what's happening right now in the community. We talk a lot about treatment, we talk a lot about prevention. The law enforcement component is, again, that is a critical part of this. And what we're doing here in York County is we treat overdose deaths as crime scenes. And this is something that wasn't always the case. And as a result of that, when someone dies of an overdose death, the police go there and they would go through their traditional investigative process to find out who sold those drugs to the individual that died. That is a very difficult task. It's one that we take very, very seriously. And so through that, we have charged individuals with a crime here in York County called drug delivery resulting in death. And it's a very, very serious charge. And
is that a relatively new statute?
It's the statute itself was old. However, it was amended. It was around 3.5 years ago is when the statute was amended and when we really started investigating these cases. It's important because that allows us to find the individual drug dealer who is the person who is selling this poison that's killing people.
And Dave, we're almost running out of time, but I want to point out what you told me beforehand, and that is that York County has used this statute more than any other county so far. Is that correct?
That's what I've been told.
Okay. And we're almost out of time, but I would like to thank you.
Thank you
for continuing with the good work. My guest today was David Sunday, the District Attorney of York County, and we were talking about the opioid crisis in York County, which is similar to the rest of the country. This is Legal Lines. Thank you for watching.